All right. Hey guys, welcome to the webinar. We are about to get started. I'm just going to wait a little bit longer to make sure that everyone gets here who wanted to attend and wanted to learn today about some cool features in Photoshop and InDesign. I can see that there's already quite a lot of you just reached 200, the attendees, so that's good, but it keeps going up, so that's brilliant. So my name is Martin. I'm from Yes, I'm a Designer. You might know me from my YouTube channel. Today we will have a live session and I'm going to show you some really cool stuff. But before we get started, just a couple of useful things that you might have seen already in the slides mentioned. If you have any questions about the things that I'm going to cover or in general about InDesign and Photoshop, use the questions box and leave comments, feedback, and as I said, or questions. Also, you will get the recording of the whole session. So I will be going quite fast and cover a lot of things. So if you want to come back and watch anything that I show you and repeat it, you will get the recording in a follow-up email after this webinar. So don't worry, you don't have to take notes. Just sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Also in that follow-up email, you will get, besides the video recording, a 10% off voucher for all BenQ monitors. So the SW, PD, and PV series professional monitors. And this will be valid for a month from today. So that will be also included. And there will be some information on availability on the stocks because obviously it's due to the lockdown, there might be some shortages, but you will get some more information on that as well. Now on my screen, while I'm talking about these screens, I just have like a little reference of the setup that I'm using. And you can see all three of my workstations are, the main screens are all BenQ monitors. And they are quite similar. The one on the left, PD 3220 and the 3200, they're quite similar. However, the 3220 is slightly more newer and it has a little bit more features. One feature in particular that I love is the low blue light option, which you can very quickly just access by using the hotkey puck. So you can program it and then switch quickly between the options there. I also wear normally these glasses just to filter out the blue light. When you work long hours, this is definitely something I recommend to have. But if you have screens that can get rid of the blue light, you don't even need these glasses. Now, I still use them because I have additional screens like the iMac monitor, which you can't really change to get rid of the blue light. So I still like to use the glasses as well. But apart from that, obviously, there's lots of very cool features like the USB-C connection. So you can easily connect a laptop and charge it, not just have it connected and use it together with. So use the BenQ monitor as a second screen. You can also charge your laptops through it. And then there is on the right the SW321C, which just arrived recently, and I have been testing it. And there is going to be a full review video on my channel soon. This is a really unique monitor. I just can't believe how good it is at completely removing any reflections. So I tried using even like flashlights and everything. I have quite a bright studio, so I have quite a lot of lights going on. And even without the shading, which you get with this monitor, and you can put it around it. So to create a frame, even without that, it's already amazing. It's almost like looking at a print. And it's mainly for photographers, but to be honest, this is actually amazing for digital art and graphic design as well. So I am going to review that monitor in more detail. And if you want to find out more about these screens, I have already covered one of them, the one in the middle. I covered that already in another review video. But without wasting any more time, I think spent enough time now just to go through everything as an introduction, and I think it's time to get started. So let me jump straight into InDesign. Let's just start here. So in this session, I will try to spend the next hour really focusing on the techniques that I find useful when it comes to creating compositions and layouts, specifically for magazines. But I always like to spend some time on theory as well, instead of just purely going through Photoshop and InDesign techniques, because the theory, if it's explained in a simple way, can be just as important for you to create interesting designs. So I use Milanote normally to put together references and examples that I like. And this is again another video which is coming up on our YouTube channel, where I go in more detail on the anatomy of a magazine spread. So all the different details that you would normally have in a magazine spread. But I will show you a couple of these today because I am going to talk about it. So there's some really cool examples coming up, which we will take a closer look at. But first of all, one of the most common things that you would need to do in a magazine layout, and in general in InDesign, is to combine text and images somehow. Now, the most boring thing you can do is to have everything in very visible blocks next to each other, especially like have an image with a background that's not even that interesting. Like in this case, this pineapple was already isolated from its background, but it's simple JPEG, so there's no transparency in it. So if I put this next to text, obviously it's not going to be interesting at all. And this is really the first and most basic thing that you can do in InDesign to make things a bit more interesting. So if you have a clearly defined object within an image, it doesn't have to be on white background, but something that separates quite well from the background, then you can use the following method. You go into the window menu, and actually you go into the object menu first, and you go through clipping path options. I normally use the shortcut for it, even though it's a little bit complicated, but there you go, that's the shortcut. Command Option Shift K or Control Alt Shift K is the menu that you would need for this. And I think it's just not showing up right now because of my screen setup. That's a shame. Let me try it again if it comes up. Yeah, it's here. It was just hiding away. So if I switch this to detect edges and I have the preview option on, you can see already that it can generate a clipping path from simply just detecting the subject of the image. Now, this is not as advanced as Photoshop in detecting the subject, but it still does quite a good job. And you can see that you can vary the threshold. So increasing the threshold will increase the amount of details that are going to be hidden, and reducing that, we will start to see more of the details. Now, you can also include inside edges, which can take out even those sections in the middle, which would be similar to like using the magic wand feature for the tolerance settings, where you can again just jump through details and have the inside edges. And then you can also play around with the tolerance with which you can increase or decrease the amount of anchor points that are created. So this is a vector mask essentially that's created. And once we click OK, that's already quite cool. So now I can just move the image and we can see that it really, we got rid of that white background. It's, as I said, not as accurate as doing it in Photoshop, but still gets you a quick result. And when you're working in magazines, sometimes you have to process hundreds of images that you have to go through, and sometimes certain details might be tiny, so they don't have to be like 100% precisely selected. So something like this could do easily in like a side panel or a box out detail within the magazine. But the other thing that you can do once you use detect edges for the clipping mask, you can also use the text wrap feature, which can make it more interesting and combine the text and the image together. So within the text wrap panel, you would just need to go into the third option, the wrap around object shape. And that again uses the detect edge path that was created earlier, and you can use these independently from each other so that you don't have to use them together. It just uses the same algorithm, but you can see, and now I can also increase, decrease the offset. So I can keep the text further away or closer to the pineapple image, and I can then move the whole thing around, and you can see how it's going to push the text away from itself. So first clipping path to remove the background, and then text wrap detect edges to be able to create this result. Once again, if I go back to text wrap, you just have to make sure that the type is set to either detect edges or same as clipping. Okay, so I normally would use same as clipping if I already applied that to the image. But that's all I wanted to show you in this quick first example. But if you want to do a better job, and if you want to create a professional combination of images with text in a bit more interesting way, usually you want to achieve some kind of depth in your composition. Like here's an example with a magazine cover, where you see that the guy, the main character, it feels like he's in front of the main title of the magazine. And that's a very, very common technique with cover images. So you would have the hero image integrated into the text. So you would have text on top, then the character, then some text behind, and then the original background of the image. And this is actually something I'm going to show you from to start out how to set this up. But first, I wanted to jump back to this example here, because I want to make sure you understand the difference between these two main masking techniques. And believe me, masking is the key to make things look cool. And generally, any technique that you would use in a magazine layout would involve masking in one way or another. And you will see all the examples I'm going to go through. I will always point out where masking is applied. So that's usually the twist that makes your composition more interesting. So that's why it's so important to learn these techniques. And without Photoshop, you wouldn't be able to achieve really good masks. So the two ways of doing things, one is a pixel mask, or layer mask, it's also called. The other is a vector mask. So here I have an image on the right side, let's just start with this, which has already a clipping mask added to it. But this was created within Photoshop and not in InDesign. Let's just see what happens if we use InDesign clipping path. So if I go into, once again, object clipping path feature, here if I choose detect edges, okay, it doesn't even find any edges in this case, because the object is just too similar to the background. So the color and contrast is not enough for InDesign to detect the object. However, if I already done my homework and prepared the path in Photoshop, which I will show you how it looks, I can call on that from within InDesign and just choose the path that I created. If there's an image with multiple paths, you can even name them and select them from here. So you can see I have a camera path created, and I can still use things like insetting the frame. I can even go in minus directions and keep growing that value. By the way, whenever there's a number within InDesign or Photoshop, you can use up and down arrows to change it, or shift up and down arrows to quickly increase, decrease the value. So that's what you see here that I'm doing. So I'm just going to set this back to 0, so I don't need inset. And if I click OK, that's essentially what we get. So if I move this over here and put it over the other image, you can see how nicely it's been cut out. And this is really the advantage of using a vector mask, because you would get these perfectly created sharp edges. And even on details like here at the bottom, you can see all of those little bumps are perfectly selected. Now, this is something that you would do within Photoshop. And within Photoshop, this is saved as a path. So within the paths panel, this is what you are essentially creating. So when you use a tool like the pen tool, or even a simple tool like the shape tools, I'll just show you how to get started. If you use the ellipse tool, let's just say, I'm going to add the big ellipse here and around the lens. Let's just say something like that for now. And then I'm going to show you, like here in the path panel, you can already see it. If I double click on this, and let's just call it ellipse and save it. Oops, I just spelled it wrong. There you go. So that's saved. If I save this file, it's a Photoshop file, by the way, but you can even save parts within a JPEG. So JPEGs can store multiple parts, which is quite useful to know. So now if I come back here and I go back to my settings, clipping path, I can choose the ellipse option, and you can see that's another mask saved within the same file. Now, of course, the best tool to use is the pen tool, or a combination of the shapes and the pen, because you can combine multiple parts within the same vector mask. And this is actually a quite complex topic. If you're interested to find out more about this, the video that came out this week on my YouTube channel goes into much more detail on this. Actually, sorry, it was last week's video. So working with shapes and creating masks. But in a nutshell, you already seen here what's important to know about vector masks. And I'm just going to go back into Photoshop and undo these changes. So it should update as well here. Let's just update the image so we get the high resolution back. Now, when it comes to soft edge details, then you most likely will need to use a layer mask or a combination of the vector mask and the layer mask. So an object like that camera on the right, we would normally call a hard edge detail. So for hard edge details, making selections, you normally would use a vector mask on its own. While here, with the hair in particular, but anything like grass, tree with leaves, an animal's fur, these would all be considered soft edge, or my beard would also be soft edge. So if you have an image which includes soft edges, you would need to have an alpha channel or a layer mask created. So I can show you this. Again, I go into the clipping mask or clipping path settings. But in this case, instead of detect edges or Photoshop path, you could use alpha channel. And you can see it already comes up saying girl, and I can again make changes here, but I'm going to show you clicking away that it created a really nice edge. So again, nice edge around the body, but very nice edge around the hair. So once again, if I go into Photoshop, by the way, the shortcut I'm using is Alt or Option double clicking on the image, which opens it up within Photoshop or Illustrator if it's an Illustrator working file that you placed into InDesign. So once you have an image open, you can see the mask or alpha channel within the channels. So while a vector path is saved in paths, or clipping path is saved there, the alpha channel is saved within channels, and I can show you how it looks. So that's the mask that was created. And the way, or the fastest way to create these type of selections is by using the subject select feature, which has been improved a lot recently. Last week, there was a big update to Photoshop and generally to Creative Cloud. And I don't know whether you noticed, but even the icons got updated. So we have new icons. I actually quite like them. First, I was a bit skeptical and I was missing that nice highlight or edge or frame around the icons, but I actually got used to it now, and it's grown on me. So let me know what you think about the new icons. And in general, like all of the icons are obviously now a little bit more integrated, and also the Creative Cloud icon itself is very nice and colorful now. There's rainbow colors on it instead of just that strong red that we had before. But besides the icons change, what's more important is that we have this cool feature now, the subject select, that got improved a lot. So if I open this file, let me just go into here. I have an image. So I specifically chose this image because it's not an easy selection. So not only we have hair, quite a lot of hair. Once again, I would consider these the soft edge details. So I'm just going to draw here. So this is soft edge, this is soft edge, okay? And the rest I would say everything is hard edge detail. Maybe obviously here we have a little bit more hair, and I think that's all. But yeah, so we have the soft edge details combined with hard edge details. So that's already makes the selection, if it's an automated selection, quite complex. But not only that, we also have a background that's quite similar in colors to the foreground. Plus also it's not just a single color, like a backdrop, like, well, I have this green screen behind me, but it's actually add some details there. And it's quite like detailed. There's a lot of little details. So we normally call this a high frequency background. Even though there's a shallow depth of field, it still makes the selection quite difficult. Now, let's see how the latest version of Subject Select works. And this, by the way, is artificial intelligence. It uses artificial intelligence based on Adobe Sensei. So it analyzes the image and understands what it can see in the image. So now if I go into the selection option called Select and Mask, you will see how this looks. So it created an amazing quality selection, especially here on the right side. On the left side, there's a little bit of haziness in certain parts, but generally, I think it really captured well the details that we needed. And around the clothes as well, I think this is the only bit here that needs to be added. So that's again something that we can easily do just using this selection brush. I'm going to paint over that, and then that detail will be added there. Now, we can, of course, change our view within Photoshop. We can see it on black. We can see it on white. Let's just see the hair. I mean, that is quite a good selection there, and completely automated. So all of this was automatically selected. Now, if I want to then make changes, there's lots of additional options here. We can use the Refine Edge brush as well. We have now the object selection tool also here, with which you can always refine details. So I can add or remove from the selection, again, refine details like that one there. I'm just going to undo it. Probably here it was better, and maybe just add a little dot in there. Now, if I want to refine this, or sorry, if I want to turn this into a selection or a mask, within the select and mask option, all you have to do is to choose new layer with layer mask. That's what I would normally use when it needs to end up in InDesign. You will see why I use this one. So when I choose that, I click OK. And then you will see that you will have your background original image without the mask. And then I would normally call this new layer masked, or yeah, masked is what I would normally apply. So now that it's saved, we can actually save it as a JPEG, and that's quite important. So it needs to be layered. And now that it's saved, we can jump back into InDesign. And remember that example that I showed with the cover. Now, I show you the layer structure for this. So within the layers, what I normally do is that I have my text on a separate layer on top. Then we have maybe a few graphics like this thing here. I would probably put it in the graphics, and also the barcode should be on the graphics layer. It's good to separate things so I can have them turned off separately, and the text as well. So, but these were all on top of everything. Then comes this sandwich of the two versions of the image and the text in between it. So this main title text in between it. So you can see if I turn off the layer on top, which says actor or main image, then we can see that the cinema text was on top of the original image. Now let's see if we build this up from scratch, what happens. So I select this image in the background, and I'm going to drop our new PSD on it. All right. We just drop it in here, and I will increase the size of it, probably up to, let's just say, Command Shift drag and drag it in the middle, something like that. Okay, cool. So it's already quite interesting how the scale of an image makes such a big difference. She looks so much more menacing, having her larger, especially because she's looking down. So now she looks a bit more scary. Before, when she was smaller, she didn't look that threatening. So scale, obviously, in composition is crucial. You really have to be good at defining the scale. Sometimes even having like just a half of an image can be enough, because your brain can imagine the other side of the person. I mean, it can always you can always leave it to the imagination of your viewer to finish an image. It doesn't have to be fully visible, but I'm going to keep it in the middle for now. And I will go into the options for this image by right-clicking and choosing Object Layer Options. And here you actually have access to the layers that you set up originally in Photoshop. So I can turn the background layer back and have the preview option on as well. So that actually shows the original image, right? But then we copy this whole thing. So I copy and go into this other layer, and I'll just call this, instead of actor, I will call it character or subject. Let's just call it subject. That makes more sense. And then on this layer, I will make sure we can see it. I will get rid of the original guy, and instead I just paste in this image again. So the same Photoshop image, I paste in again. Now I will turn on the text behind this, but we can't see that text currently because it's covered up by this other image. But if I now go back again to Object Layer Options and turn off the background layer, that's how we create that sandwich that I was talking about earlier. So now this second version of the image has no background, right? But because it's aligned with the other image, it just simply is placed on top, and the text is in between the two images. And the good thing is that I can even select these two images, even though they are on two separate layers. And if I feel like the text wasn't legible enough, I can just push her down a bit, having both of the layers selected. And of course, then comes all the graphics and text that we had originally that we can bring back. And there you go, there's a really cool magazine cover design. Now, let's move on and talk a little bit more about other techniques, still with masking. And very common thing that you can do with the same exact method that I just showed you, having a Photoshop file set up with two layers, the background layer and the layer on top, which is already masked out, you can create out of bounds effects so quickly and easily. So here we have the same photo. I just have two versions of it. This one is the one that's already uses the mask version. So if I show you the layer options, same exact setup. So this one is using the mask version, while this one is using the original one. If I align these two layers on top of each other, right, and then I select the original photo, I can just simply drag down this and create the out of bounds effect there. I could also go further down, and again, having the two layered on top of each other, we can very quickly create these cool techniques. And then of course we can also add a corner radius and just create a little bit more interesting outline. We could reduce the size of this frame and so on and so forth. Now, out of bounds effect, again, creates some or adds some depth to your compositions. And if you want to see some examples of this, some like professional examples, I can show you a lot of these. So for example, let me just go into out of bounds. Here is a really nice one. So this spread, although it's very subtle, but it's a very important part here, the depth that was created. So you can see that big clock in the middle, and how nicely the white line there on the top that runs across is showing up in between those gaps there. So that's, again, creates depth and creates the interesting combination of the images. It's not really out of bounds, but it's just, again, overlaying things on top of each other and paying attention to these subtle little details. Now, if you want to be more obvious with this, you could even have that white line coming through here, so make it look like it's piercing through the clock. But I'm sure I can find another example. Let me just go up. I think there were a few examples here of out of bounds. Yeah, there you go. So I'm just gonna zoom a little bit closer here. you can see the editor in this case, or the author's box, that little image there. If I just open this up in a new tab, I can show you better. That one again is using out of bounds. So very subtle and small detail, but still important. And then if we go back, I'm sure there was another good example here somewhere. Of course, this car image is also created in a way that it's the background, original background is removed. But then we have lots of objects that are masked, like these furniture here, as you can see. Again, masking being crucial. And let me just find, I think that was a good example somewhere, but I just can't find it right now, but I will come back to this. For now, I will just go back and show you all of them together. So what I wanted to continue talking about are entry points. So besides masking, that's another very important thing you need to pay attention to when you design magazine layouts. So entry points are the details within a magazine or a spread that will draw people's attention. So for example, if you look at this spread here, you probably will recognize the entry points. So we have the heading or title in this case, and then we have also, just move things around a bit. So we normally would call that the headline on the left side, right? But then we also have the drop cap. Now this big letter in this case is not just a simple font used within InDesign. It's actually a Photoshop composition. If I open this up, you can see how this was built. Once again, I used masking, but in this case, this is the third type of masking that's also important. It's clipping mask, which means that I used, as the base of this design is actually a letter. So that's a font I really like and I use often. It's called Heavitas. It's a free font. You can find it online and download it. There's the name for it. So it's like heavy, but Heavitas together, written like that. So this is my base layer, right? And then I have on top of this another image layer, this photo, and all I've done is place them on top of each other and then hold down the Option or Alt key and click between the two layers in Photoshop. That creates the clipping mask. So in this case, the letter underneath is going to be the silhouette or the outline, and the image will be wrapped into the text. And it's still an editable text, so I could even change the text by using the type tool. I can use another character, so on and so forth. But more importantly, I also used an effect called inner shadow. If I zoom a little bit closer, you can probably see it better. So when I turn it on, turn it off, right? You can see that little detail there. So this makes it feel like there is, again, depth there. So it's almost like through this white piece of paper, we see underneath it, and there is some nice nature detail there. So without that, it looks a bit flat, but with that subtle detail, it already looks a bit more interesting. But once again, what makes it more interesting is the out of bounds technique, which in this case is very simple. All I have done is to place the same exact image again on top as a new layer, and then using a layer mask, I only show certain little details like these leaves. Now, the way you do that, I'll just show you very quickly. All you have to do is, if I delete that layer mask, I'm going to hold down the Option or Alt key and click on the Japanese flag icon, the mask icon here in the layers panel. That creates a completely hidden layer by using a mask that hides everything. And then I know where these leaves are, so I can just paint over them here on the mask by using white. So with white, I can just paint over them. There it is. If I use the X on the keyboard, I can hide away from these details and then just show that single little detail. Now, of course, I would spend a bit more time refining this, but hopefully you get the idea. So this is a very simple build again within Photoshop, and all you have to do is to create something like this and then place it into InDesign. And once you place it into InDesign, I would normally have it set up, the drop cap, as an inset image. And the way that works is that you not just simply place the text, not just simply place it in and I use text wrap around it. Instead, I would have it set up as an inset image. So the way that works is by placing the image in, cutting it out, double click inside the text and put the cursor at the beginning, and there Control or Command V, pasting the image in. Now notice that since I already set up a drop cap for this paragraph, the image automatically uses that drop cap feature. So if I go into the paragraph and change that setting, so here we have the drop cap feature option. If I reduce the number, you can see how it's going to again adjust the text accordingly. So it's a quite good combination of using drop cap and an inset image and the out of bounds effect. So things are starting to already come together, the things that we talked about. Now, the other thing that is worth mentioning here is that there are like common rules that you should be paying attention to. One of the things that I very often see that people overdo the separation of elements within the body copy. So it's a good thing to have well identified groups within your text, but what you want to avoid is to be too obvious or overemphasize the separation of paragraphs. For example, that's the most common building blocks we have with text, especially with body copy. They are our paragraphs. Now, one way of separating them is to use space between the paragraphs. So that's very easy to set up within the paragraph settings. You just use this option. By the way, that was also fairly recently introduced. Before we only had space before and space after. Now we have also space between paragraphs. So I can increase, decrease that. You can see how it's adjusting and making the changes. But the other thing that you can also do is to have indents like these first line indents that we have here. Now, normally, if you have space between your paragraphs, you don't need the first line indent. So either use one or the other. So in this case, I would select both of these paragraphs and I would get rid of that first line indent. So it first of all makes it a little bit more organized as well, keeping a nice left edge there, but also it was completely irrelevant. It wasn't necessary to be indented. So if you have no space between the paragraphs, so once again, if I just go into 0 space there, then it would make sense to have an indent there on the second paragraph. But once again, not on the first one because there's already a space in between that, the first and second paragraphs. So I don't want to go into too much detail on this, but just try to keep in mind that the less is more in general in design. So you don't want to overemphasize the differences between certain details. So it's important to have well-defined units and also have a hierarchy between your units, but you don't want to be overemphasizing them. So try to be subtle. That's like a general rule that always works. Now, moving on, here we have another quite nice example of a combination of Photoshop and InDesign for a drop cap that is using masking technique to combine an image with the drop cap. By the way, you can also see another out of bounds effect here used on this skull on the right. Now, if I open this file here on the left side where we have our drop cap combined with the text wrap as well, if I open this up in Photoshop, you can see that the way this was built, again, is mainly relying on layer masks and clipping masks as well in this case. So once again, it's just a combination of all of the things that we already talked about. So I am going to simplify this for you and show you from scratch, essentially, what I would normally do. So I delete everything. And by the way, masking one of the biggest advantage of doing it in Photoshop is that it's completely non-destructive. So either you are using layer mask, vector mask, or clipping mask, they are all non-destructive techniques. So you can always go back and reveal the original details. Like here, you can see I still have the original background. But what we would do, just like before, to get started with the subject select option. So we go to select subject. Again, it should do quite a good job on identifying the soft edges and hard edges and separating them and handling them differently. So here we can already see that we have quite a lot of soft edges, not just her hair, but also the fur she's wearing. And then we have also hard edges around the clothes further down. But now if I go into creating a mask from this straight away by clicking on the mask icon here, we get that nice selection. And by the way, in Photoshop, if you alter option click on the mask icon, you can always double check the mask that was created. Once again, I think it's really, really good selection. I mean, look at that detail there. And that was all automated using artificial intelligence. So saved us a lot of time. But now what we need is to also include some additional mask. What I want to do, or what I want to achieve, is to make it look like that her hands are in front of this V, but her body is going behind that V. And that's another thing that's very important to learn, is that most of the time, if you want to create something a bit more complex and interesting, one mask is not going to be enough. You want to combine multiple layer masks. And the way you can do that is by using layer groups. So this is when I learned about this, or when I realized the importance of this, it completely changed the way I worked, and it made everything so much easier. And I started creating much cooler results. So let me show you how it works. So far, it's very simple. We just simply use subject select and turn it into a mask, right? Simple. But now what I will do is press Control or Command G to create a group. You can also go to the layer menu and then choose create group from there. I don't even know where it is. I never use the menus. But I am going to then create a mask on this group, right? Just simply add the mask. You don't even need any selection, just simply add the mask. Now, this mask is going to work completely independently from the other mask, but their result is combined. So again, white shows black hides. That's how the mask works. Currently, it's completely white, so it is showing every detail. But if I start using my brush tool, I can start deleting from this, all right? So I can delete from it, but what I will also do is to make a selection of the letter V behind her. And the way you can do that is by Command or Control clicking on the T icon of the text layer. Or if it's an image, you can click on the thumbnail. So essentially, Command or Control clicking on the thumbnail makes a selection of the details, in this case, these details that you can see on my screen. And I can just very quickly paint over it while still at the same time paying attention to where the arm is. So I don't want to delete that. And also here on the right side, I want to keep the sword visible, okay, and the scabbard. And on the right side, again, the sword actually the sword can go behind the text, the letter. It's just her arm that I want to keep in front. And once again, you can see you don't have to be 100% perfect with this selection, because no one will really notice that in the final result. So I've done it very quickly and very just roughly what we needed. Maybe here a little bit I can remove from it. And then I will get rid of my selection, Command or Control D, right? And then still within the same group, layer group mask, I can now start removing all of these details. And I'm just using a very big brush, and I'm using a mouse, so I'm not even going to be that precise. And I'm not going to finalize this, but you can see the best thing about using two masks, and this is what I meant, why it's so important, because if I go too far and I end up messing up the lovely fur detail that we have there, I can always press X on the keyboard and simply reveal it without revealing the original background. Because we have two levels of masking. The original mask was to separate the subject from the background. The second mask is just to further refine the details that we wish to see, right? So I can very quickly come back and maybe show all of this detail here and then just cut it down there. So that way it seems like it's part of the dress and it ends there. And then of course, if I zoom closer, reducing the brush size, I can further refine this and of course get rid of details inside here, or maybe just on the right side there, and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to again refine this too much, but you can already see how much better it looks. If I just remove that, we essentially have the combination of the image and the text. Now the last thing that I would normally do is to add some shadow or cast shadow onto the text, because if you create the look where it feels like something is combined with something else, in this case the character with the text, you also want to make it look more realistic by really thinking about light and how light would work. So cast shadow in this case would be probably here under the arm and also somewhere around here. So to create that, we just create a new layer. I will call it shading, right? And then we use the brush tool. I would normally pick a color from the image, maybe this brown color here, a darker brown color. Okay, and then using a soft edge, I'm using Control Option, click and drag up and down with the brush tool, and then I would just paint over here around the edge and then somewhere around there. And this layer can be set to multiply blend mode, so it just blends a little bit better. This was without multiply, and this is with it, right? It's another cool thing in Photoshop. Recently, it was introduced that you can get a preview with all the blending modes, so you can very quickly toggle or hover over the ones that we have in the list, and you can see immediately the results. But I will stick to multiply, and I think that creates a quite nice effect, once again, without the shading and with the shading. And when it's ready, we can just get rid of the white background and then place this into InDesign, which you can already see here. The only additional thing that I've done here is to use text wrap to keep the text away from the image. So if I come closer and move this image around, you can see how it's affecting the text. That's already something we've seen earlier on. So hopefully now you can see how everything is coming together. The things that we talked about in general, working with text and images in combining them together, but also creating interesting focal points that draw people's attention. And when they open a magazine and they see a spread, it immediately grabs their attention and they want to get started from that point. So in this case, this huge drop cap that I added on the left is not only a drop cap, but also shows a very interesting image, which obviously is about the article that is covered, in this case, adventures or Vikings in this case. Now, drop caps, of course, they don't have to be so aggressive. They can be very subtle as well, like this one here on the right side. It goes better with this design in this case. So obviously it uses the same color. It has a nice unity with the left side of the spread, but it's just a simple text placed behind the body copy. And if you use a subtle enough color, your body copy will be easy to be read, so it's still legible. But again, we have a good strong entry point with the drop cap created like this. Another thing here, we have obviously a large drop cap. Again, remember what I said about scale. So if you want to have a large drop cap, you can create something like this. Let's say this size already works, but if you have the luxury of having a huge empty negative space in your first page of an article, then why not go crazy and create a massive drop cap, something like that, where the letter doesn't even fit on the page. It has to be cropped slightly to the left. Once again, remember, the brain will connect those details and it will be able to, your viewer will be able to imagine what's left out from that drop cap. And all you have to do is to create your text wrap. Now, what happens if you are using a text wrap on another text? So in this case, this character here, if I set it up with text wrap, right? If I choose use wrap around object shape, in this case, I don't have any contour options, right? I could go through these settings, but there's not really any contour options because it doesn't recognize the text outline as a contour. One thing that you can do is to turn it into outlines. So to create outlines from this text, which you can do by going into paths, open path, but that's going to lose the editability of the text. So I'm going to actually go back, and instead, in these cases, what I prefer to do is to create a separate shape. Normally I would use the pen tool, so I would just draw a path from the top to the bottom and then create the shape, maybe going left and up and then close it. So that empty shape, which then I can set to object, wraparound object shape, increase maybe the offset, and there you go. It's not a visible object because it's completely transparent, but it can create the same effect, the text wrap that we were looking for. So just remember, normally what I would do is to combine these two objects together into a group, Control or Command G, just like in Photoshop, and that way when I move it around, it's going to create a larger text wrap in this case. Okay, hopefully that made sense as well. And I am going to show you another example. This one is not that interesting. I had another example which I wanted to finish on, and that is the data merge feature, and then we will have some time for going through your questions. So this is just the last little example of InDesign's one of my favorite features in InDesign, which can be used for automation, and it's called data merge. Now, this particular example is not for magazines, but it is great for things like business cards, where you can create a template like what you can see on my screen, where you have the front and back of a business card. This can be created in Illustrator, like this is an Illustrator file, but the text is actually added as a text frame here within InDesign on top of the Illustrator artwork. So this page is already set up, and I actually already populated this frame with these data merge tags or elements. So if I go into the window menu, and on the utilities data merge, I can show you that these are the elements, right? And there is already a text file that I imported in here. I can show you that text file as well separately. So data merge, employees. So we have a simple text file created, which can be exported from Excel. You just have to make sure that your first row has the definitions that you will be using within InDesign. So the name, job title, email address, phone number. It can even pick up images if you use an @ sign, but in this case, it's just simply copy. And then we have several rows of information. So all of this information then can be populated through the data merge panel. I can turn on the preview and you can see it generates or brings in that information from the text file. So I can even go through all these different versions, and I can see how it's going to be populated. And whoever is a gamer will probably recognize these names from an amazing game called Red Dead Redemption 2. So that's just another quick thing I wanted to point out within InDesign, even though it's not magazine, a little bonus tip at the end. So we have 5 minutes left, but we don't have a hard stop, so we can always spend a little more time if there's more questions. So I would like to have a look at the questions right now. So let me go through them, and I will make this a little bit bigger. All right, so I can see it better. And feel free, guys, if you have any more questions, you can still ask them. So, okay. Okay, these are at the beginning, just questions about technical issues. Okay, so Marina was asking about which layers are inside the group. I guess that question was closer to the end, so most likely is going to be the question asked about the Viking example, but Marina, you can let me know if I'm wrong. The only layer that's within the group is the image layer, the one that's called color balance, but I can just call it Viking. So you can see that that's the only layer inside it. So the text doesn't need to be within that layer group. The text doesn't need to be masked. It's just the image itself. So the image already had a mask on it, which was hiding its original background. But then this additional mask that we added on the group is to hide the further details that we needed in this composition. Okay, perfect. Okay, how do you change? Victor is asking, how do you change the color of highlighted menu selections? Highlighted menu selections. I'm guessing that was a question for Photoshop. You change the color of highlighted menu selections. Do you mean like actually going into here and changing the menu selections, like this color, this gray color? I'm not 100% sure what you mean. Or do you mean the layer selections? I'm not sure, Victor, what you mean. If you can just give me a little bit more information on what you meant by that. My YouTube channel's name is Yes, I'm a Designer here on my cap. You can see it. I guess I can share that with you all here in the chat. Let me just drop the link in there. If you haven't seen my channel yet, I will share it in the chat. Okay, there you go. Cool. So here's another question from Konstantin. If I want to place black text over a big black letter, is it possible to make the text on top to be white? Let's say the example that this could be applied to is the slide with that huge drop cap letter V. Hope that question makes sense. Yeah, of course. I mean, like, if we go back to that example that I had there, let's just jump back in here. I think it was this one most likely. If I go into this and I'm going to select that text and maybe make it a bit more bold. So instead of using this, I can use ultra black and then increase the size. So when you're using a very thick text like that, you can of course have your body copy placed on top of it and just simply have the text set white. So as another useful shortcut in InDesign, when you have a text frame selected, by default, normally InDesign wants to change the color, whether it's the fill or the stroke of the frame, not the text inside the frame. But if you press J on the keyboard, notice how it changes, having the fill and the stroke colors of the frame visible right now. But if I press J, it jumps, that's how I remember it, J for jump, to the colors of the text within the frame. The same thing you can access by these little icons here, but it's just annoying if you have to do that all the time. So I always just use the shortcut. So having jumped to the text color, I can just change it to paper in this case, and I'm going to make sure it's placed in the right layer. So if I drop it up here, you can see how it's going to work. And I'm just going to get rid of the drop cap, the text wrap in this case, which we still have that shape there, which we don't need right now. Okay, and by the way, if you want the text to be following the shape of the letter, then you can also have it following it very easily by just using the direct selection tool. Select the bottom 2 points of the frame and simply drag it to the left. Look at that, how quick and easy that is. So using the direct selection tool, align it to the text frame, and you can even select individual points. And this is almost like an inverted text wrap, right? Because what we are doing here is we are creating a shape, a unique frame for the text. I hope I understood correctly what you were asking, Constantine. I think this is what you meant, hopefully. Dusan is asking, I don't have questions, but thank you. That's great. I'm glad you liked the tutorial webinar. Ismail is asking, how can you get rid of the center column stroke in tables? Center column stroke in tables. Yes, so when you are working with tables, there's one thing that you have to do, which is going to create a new page so you can see this quickly. So I will create a table, let's say 4 by 4, and define it here. Okay, so the way you can change details or the edges is that you first of all need to select everything that you want to affect. In this case, you can also, if you want the whole table to be affected, just click on the top left corner of the table. When you see that cursor currently visible on my screen, that's the way you can select the whole table. And then this little bit here on the top is what you need to check. You have to make sure that the outer edges are not selected. So you remove the highlights from them. You highlight the inner edges, and then you reduce the value to 0, or you can set the color to something more subtle, maybe like something like that, and 0.25, and then it should be much more subtle. I think it's just too faint, but yeah, you can see it now. It's not as strong as the outer edges. Once again, double clicking on the text frame, clicking on the top left corner, making sure you highlight only the inner edges, and then you remove the stroke, and that's basically it. But you still have a grid. So if I use the tab key, you can see I have cells still, even though we are not seeing any edges. And the same way, you can also change the outer edge of your table. So Ismail, hopefully that made sense. Darlene is asking, yes, it's recorded, the webinar is recorded, and yeah, I know I went through a lot of things very quickly, so you will get the recording at the end of this webinar, which you will get an email with the link to the recording. Okay, we have another question from Ethel. Is there any website you recommend to look for inspiration when creating layouts for magazines? Okay, so I am actually going to cover this in a video coming to the channel in a couple of weeks' time. So remember I mentioned this Milanold board where I show a couple of examples. In that video, I'm going to mention a few artists that I recommend. I actually haven't found any good websites for magazine spreads. I found, however, a good website for magazine covers. So you were asking about layouts. I actually normally do search on Behance. Behance, you probably are familiar with, but if not, I can share the link here in the chat. So Behance is Adobe's portfolio site and community site where creatives share their work. And I normally would filter for layout or editorial design is what's the best way of searching for it. And then if you find an artist that you like, normally what I would recommend is to check out their work, maybe even beyond Behance, because to be honest, art directors are normally the best ones to find. If you find art directors for magazines that you like for example, in this case, one of these guys, Kevin Fay, is a brilliant artist. I'm going to just share this link quickly as well. So he's an art director, Kevin Fay. That's not copying it yet. Let me just try to open this and then copy it in. So he has done a lot of work for various magazines. Okay, I actually put the link in multiple times, but yeah, if you wait for that video that will come out soon on the channel, I will be covering more of the sources. And let me just quickly find this other link for you. I actually have a link for the magazine covers that I just mentioned. Just 1 second. So magazine cover, it's called Cover Junkie, that's the one. So here you go. This is for covers, not for layouts, but once again, like this is a huge database of current and old magazine covers as well. So let's see, hopefully I thought that made sense. Cool. And then Stephen, oh Stephen, I recognize your name. I think you are one of our members. We have, by the way, a membership on our site, yesi'mdesigner.com, where we review people's work. So if you want to show me the work that you do, you can find out more about this. Let me just share this link quickly as well with you all. So you can find out more about it if you're interested. So that's the membership. We call it Pro membership, and this is for people who would like to have a bit more than just simply accessing all of the courses that I made, but also have some feedback on their work and help with portfolio building and stuff like that. So Stephen is one of our members, by the way. Yes, so with InDesign, he's asking if I wanted to place a vector image in the working file, I guess, what file type should I use so the image remains resolution independent? Place the Illustrator file, Stephen. Use the AI format. That's the best. You can also use EPS if you want, but the AI native Illustrator file format is the best. That's going to be the best for color management as well, but also for keeping it resolution independent. However, you will probably have a couple of options in the beginning when you place it in that it's going to ask you. I think it's quite straightforward, and you can't really mess it up. So if you use AI, that's probably the best format to work with. Okay, and then I can see that's probably just answering to some of the things that I already mentioned. Yeah. There is another question. I will probably spend another couple of minutes going through the remaining questions. So I can see people are signing out as well. Whoever watched the webinar and doesn't want to wait for my answers to the questions, I thank you so much for your attention, and I hope you found this useful. And let us know if you want to see more of this type of content, and then hopefully we can arrange some more webinars in the future. And also topics that you're interested, you can always let us know, even here in the questions area. So let me go through a few more questions. So there's one about one from Ayrton from Malta. Malta is a beautiful place. I wish I could go there now. It would be lovely in this weather. After removing the background, after clicking subject, how did you refine the layer? Press something. Yeah, sorry, I don't think I will be able to repeat the whole process, but you will be able to watch the recording, and I hope it will make sense. So make sure when you get the email, just watch the recording, and if you still have trouble, just email me, and I can always help you about explaining that in more detail. But I think once you watch the recording, it should make sense. Cool. Anyone who's asked or just saying they love the webinar, I'm really glad you enjoyed it. Luke is asking, how do we get one of your caps? We don't actually have this cap yet for sale, but we've been planning to have it. We have some t-shirts on our YouTube channel that you can buy. But we are probably going to do one of these as well, make it available. So keep an eye on the YouTube channel. We have merch there. There's some really cool t-shirts, but yeah, the cap I think is going to be the next one that we will add. Oh, there's an interesting question from Noor. How to grayscale in InDesign? How to turn an image into grayscale? I guess that's what you're asking. So if you ever want to do that, what you can do is to create a big rectangle over an image, right? Fill it with black. So the fill color needs to be black. And then what you need to do is to go into the opacity options, which you can access by going into the effects icon, transparency, and then set the blend mode to color. And if you turn on preview, you'll see the grayscale effect. It's as simple as that. So create a big black box, set it to color in the blend mode through transparency from the FX menu, and then place it wherever you want it. Like here I have it on the image, but if I place this on top of everything else, even text will turn grayscale, right? And you can of course play around with this. It doesn't have to be black. You can also use it to create these overlay effects, which can also be quite cool. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, another question. Let's see. Stefan is asking, if we have a logo and behind we have an image that has a similar color as in the logo, making it harder to read, what is the solution? Yeah, in general, when you're layering things on top of each other, most important thing is to establish contrast. So there's many ways of doing that, but I would always recommend, like here, for example, in this this image, this text special doesn't read well because it's too similar to the background. So it's usually to do with how you use colors, but of course you can always use like a shape to separate things. So in this case, if I use once again a black box and place it behind it, that's already going to separate it better. Of course, it's going to be too strong in this case, so the box can be reduced in opacity, but that's just a very basic technique. There's so many other ways of establishing the contrast. This is actually also something that I covered in a couple of videos already on our channel. So I recommend checking them out. There was one recently about 5 compositional techniques with Photoshop. If you look for that video, you can learn about ways of having text on images where it's hard to read, and then how to create a nice combination. So that video is probably the one I would recommend for you to check out. Yeah, so I already shared my YouTube channel, and then just let's say 2 more questions, and then I will wrap up because we are running out of time. I wish we had more time to for me to respond to everyone, but it's also getting late here. I can see another question. Okay, these are actually just comments now. All right, cool. I think that's all we had time for. Sorry if whoever had further questions that I didn't respond to. It's not that I'm ignoring you. I would love to respond to everything in more detail, but if it's important what you're asking, you can always ask me on the YouTube channel as a comment, but probably the best thing is to email me. It's info@yesimadesigner.com. And then I will hopefully be able to help you and give you some guidance. Cool. So once again, guys, thank you so much for your attention today. Have a lovely evening or morning, wherever you are based in the world, and stay safe, stay healthy, and stay creative. All right, guys. Thanks again, and hopefully see you soon.